The name dilemma when family bonds collide over a baby's identity. It was one of those bright, lively afternoons where everyone in the family seemed to be on the same wavelength. Happily gathered together, sharing in the joy of Stephanie's news. Stephanie, my cousin and lifelong friend, had recently announced she was expecting, and today was the day she planned to reveal the name she'd chosen for her baby girl. She was radiating a kind of pure excitement that I hadn't seen in a while. There was a sparkle in her eyes that made the whole room light up. As she spoke, her hands delicately resting on her growing belly, she was positively glowing, and we were all leaning in, hanging on her every word. "I've decided to name her Karen," she declared with a beaming smile, her voice brimming with pride and love. It was a moment she'd clearly been dreaming about for months. But as soon as the name fell from her lips, the room fell eerily silent, almost as if an invisible weight had descended upon us all. I glanced around, noticing that most of our friends exchanged glances, some even stifling their reactions, clearly caught off guard by her choice. To anyone unfamiliar with the name's recent internet associations, it might have sounded like any other sweet, traditional name, but for those of us who spent time online, we knew it had become more than just a name. It was a label. One weighed down with negative connotations, memes, and viral internet jokes that painted anyone named Karen in an unflattering light. Despite Stephanie's obvious excitement, I found myself frozen, unsure of how to respond, while others managed to murmur polite compliments. A strange, conflicted feeling settled in me. I wanted to be happy for her, truly, but the idea of her child facing a life of potential mockery because of this name gnawed at me. As the evening went on, I tried to shake the feeling, but the silence that had hung in the room kept replaying in my mind. I wondered if I should say something. Stephanie and I had always been incredibly close, almost like sisters, and we had a long history of honesty between us. But honesty in this moment felt like walking a tightrope, especially when her happiness was so deeply tied to her choice. In the days that followed, my discomfort only grew, and as I saw Stephanie growing more and more excited about her decision, I wrestled with the question of whether or not to speak up. In my mind, I saw two paths, one where I stayed silent, letting her move forward unaware, and another where I took the risk, knowing that I might be misunderstood. Little did I know that this small decision would create ripples, testing the depth of our relationship, and forcing both of us to confront not only our beliefs about family but also the delicate balance between truth and tact. And so, with a heavy heart but determined mind, I decided that I would try to tell her the truth, unaware of how quickly everything would unravel from there. In the days that followed Stephanie's announcement, I found myself increasingly uneasy. Each time I recalled the look of pride in her eyes as she said the name, Karen, I felt a mix of hesitation and concern twist in my chest. Stephanie and I had a relationship built on years of radical honesty. She was the kind of friend who wouldn't hesitate to give me a hard truth when she thought it necessary. And perhaps because of this, I felt an obligation to do the same for her. But this wasn't just any conversation, it was about the name she'd chosen for her child. The last thing I wanted was to seem insensitive or, worse, to imply that her choice was anything less than meaningful to her. I struggled with the decision, tossing and turning every night. Part of me knew that if the roles were reversed, I'd want to be informed, to know the cultural weight that such a name now carried. But another part of me was filled with doubt. Imagining Stephanie's reaction, I kept picturing her face falling, her excitement fading, all because of a few words I might say. Was it worth it? Would she appreciate the insight? Or would it damage something between us that we could never fully repair? Finally, after several days of agonizing, I reached a point where my concern outweighed my fear of conflict. I resolved to talk to her, gently, cautiously, and only with the intention of making sure she had all the information. I didn't want to change her mind, just to ensure she was fully aware of the connotations of the name in today's world. One evening, I found myself sitting across from her, trying to summon the courage to broach the topic. "Stephanie," I started, keeping my voice soft, "I'm so excited for you and for the baby. I know this name means a lot to you, but there's something I think you should know." Stephanie looked at me with curiosity, her brows knitting together slightly. I could tell she wasn't expecting anything negative, and that made my heart ache a little more. I carefully explained that Karen had become a meme on the internet, often associated with an image of an entitled, demanding woman. Someone who causes scenes. Someone who's difficult and inconsiderate to others. I had barely finished when Stephanie's face went cold. Her eyes, which moments ago had been filled with warmth, narrowed, and I could see a spark of anger. "Why would you say something like that?" she asked. Her voice tinged with hurt. "Do you think I chose it as a joke?" No, I said quickly, desperately trying to calm her. I thought you might not know. You're not online a lot. And I wanted you to have all the information. I would want the same if it were me." But the explanation fell flat. She was clearly upset, and in that moment, I realized just how deep her connection to the name ran. To her, it wasn't just a word, it was a part of her dream for her daughter. A piece of her identity as a mother. Something she'd envisioned with joy and hope. In her eyes, my words were more than a caution, they were a rejection of something sacred. Stephanie stood up, shook her head, and with a sharp, "Wow," left my apartment, her face a mask of anger and disbelief. I wanted to reach out. To tell her that I hadn't meant it to come out like this. That I had only wanted to be the friend she'd always been to me, honest, direct, and caring. But she was gone before I could find the words. And I sat there in the silence, wondering if I had just made a terrible mistake. Over the following days, things went from bad to worse. Stephanie didn't respond to my texts or calls. And soon, I started hearing from family members. My aunt, her mom, called me, saying that Stephanie had told her what happened and that she felt I'd made fun of her baby's name. My own mother weighed in, asking why I'd even bring up something so trivial, telling me that I'd hurt Stephanie at one of the most vulnerable times in her life. Each new message added another layer of regret and guilt to my heart. I tried to explain myself, but it felt like no one was truly listening. As days turned into weeks, I grew more and more uncertain about my choice to speak up. Perhaps I should have stayed silent. Maybe some things are better left unsaid, even between the closest of friends. But as I replayed the conversation over and over in my head, I knew my intentions had been good. I'd acted out of care, not cruelty. Yet it seemed that my decision had come at a heavy cost. One that now felt irrevocable. Months passed, and Stephanie's daughter was born, a beautiful, healthy little girl, just as bright and lively as her mother. True to her word, Stephanie named her Karen, and I found myself grappling with my emotions each time I visited. Little Karen was growing up with an innocence that was almost palpable. And, in time, I realized that my fears had dissipated whenever I saw her. Karen, the person, had started to define the name for me in a way that stripped away any lingering cultural associations. To me, she was simply Karen, sweet, curious, full of life. But as Karen grew older and started daycare, a new challenge emerged. She began facing teasing from older children who, influenced by the world around them, found her name funny. It wasn't harsh bullying, but the laughter and whispers among the other kids bothered her. Stephanie and her husband tried their best to shield her, but the name's baggage was something they couldn't easily erase. Eventually, Stephanie and her husband decided to call her Carrie as a nickname to avoid further teasing. They even began introducing her to everyone as Carrie, hoping this adjustment would make things easier for her as she moved forward in life. This choice gave Karen, now Carrie, a chance to create her own identity without the weight of a name she hadn't chosen for herself. Reflecting on everything that had happened, I began to understand the delicate balance between truth and sensitivity. Maybe if I had approached the topic differently, I could have saved both of us the pain and misunderstanding. At the same time, I was grateful that, in the end, Stephanie found a solution that worked for her and her daughter. Carrie was thriving, and the warmth between Stephanie and me had returned, if a bit more tempered by the memory of our conflict. Years later, Stephanie confided in me about how she'd felt when she realized what Karen meant in popular culture. The memes, the connotations, all of it hit her harder than she'd expected. "I wish you'd told me differently," she said, her voice softer, filled with an understanding that only time could bring. As I listened, I felt a weight lift, a sense of closure that was healing. I apologized once more, and she accepted, reminding me that, in the end, family isn't about always being right or wrong, it's about being there. Even through the hardest conversations and misunderstandings. And as Carrie's laughter filled the air around us, I knew that the love we shared had outlasted the trials, teaching us both the true strength of honesty and the resilience of family bonds. In the end, watching Carrie, formerly Karen, grow and thrive in her own light brought a profound sense of peace. With every passing year, her name held less significance than her character, her curiosity, and her warmth. Stephanie and I found ourselves sitting together one evening, sharing a quiet moment as we watched Carrie run around the yard. Her laughter filling the air. The tension that had once hung over us, stemming from our disagreement, had dissolved, replaced by a new understanding. We had both learned valuable lessons about family, love, and the complex nature of support. As we reflected, Stephanie squeezed my hand, her face softened by time and forgiveness. "You know," she began, "all those years ago, I was so wrapped up in my dream for her that I couldn't hear what you were saying. I thought you were trying to take away something precious from me. But now, seeing Carrie happy, with a name that feels like her own, I understand that you were only trying to protect her." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of relief that my intentions were finally clear. "I could have handled it better," I admitted. "I didn't realize how much the name meant to you. I only wanted you to have all the information, so you could make the choice with open eyes. But I didn't respect the timing or the emotion you'd put into it." Stephanie smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You did what you thought was best. And I know now that you came from a place of love." We both had things to learn. She looked out at Carrie, who was now bending down to inspect a flower, completely absorbed in her own world. And I think Carrie will grow up knowing she has people around her who would move mountains to protect her, even if it means a few hard conversations. As the years passed, Karen became a memory. And Carrie embodied everything Stephanie had hoped for in her daughter: strength, kindness, and a spark of individuality that shone brighter than any name ever could. Stephanie and I continued to grow together, our bond forged stronger by our differences, learning to balance honesty with compassion. And Carrie, who would eventually come to know the full story of her name, would understand that family meant standing up for each other, even when the path wasn't easy, and that love sometimes required walking a fine line between speaking up and letting go. In the end, the lesson we both carried forward was simple yet profound. Love is not about perfection or always knowing the right thing to say. It's about showing up, staying true, and trusting that, in time, misunderstandings can be forgiven, and relationships can grow stronger. Watching Carrie grow, Stephanie and I found solace in knowing that we had given her a family rooted in resilience, honesty, and, above all, unconditional love. And as Carrie turned and waved at us with a beaming smile, I knew that everything we'd gone through had been worth it, shaping a future filled with acceptance, understanding, and a shared sense of peace. The final betrayal finding strength after heartbreak and lies. It was a morning like any other. Or so it seemed. Sunlight filtered through the window, casting soft patterns on the bed where they lay. For years, this had been her safe place. A home built together in times of love, laughter, and whispered promises. But as she opened her eyes that day, she could feel something, a slight tremor, like a fault line beneath her feet. She didn't know it yet, but this would be the day that fault line fractured her world. Their story had started simply enough. Like many others, 4 years earlier, they had found each other at a time of unexpected transition. Both were seeking stability, a break from the chaos of everyday struggles. When the pandemic arrived and life took an unexpected pause, they moved in together out of necessity. It made sense, consolidating resources, pooling expenses. They became each other's constant, finding comfort in each other's routines. But somewhere along the way, the subtle shadows began to stretch across their relationship. Her partner, once attentive and caring, became increasingly possessive. First, it was the small requests that seemed harmless, like spending less time with friends or avoiding certain people. "It's for us," he'd say, "to make our bond stronger." She agreed, thinking of it as a way to nurture their relationship. Yet these small requests grew, turning into ultimatums. He insisted that she sever all ties with her male friends. Any hint of outside contact felt like a threat to him. Looking back, she realized that the isolation had been part of his plan, a way to tighten his grip around her. Slowly and subtly, ironically, he proclaimed himself a staunch believer in loyalty. He'd say, "I despise cheaters. If anyone in my life cheats, they're cut off immediately." This conviction had reassured her back then. After all, wasn't that what everyone wanted in a partner? Someone who valued trust above all else. But as she learned later, words are easy, And convictions can mask intentions. The first sign of a deeper betrayal came in whispers. Faint and nagging. It was nothing concrete, just a feeling she couldn't shake. He had started acting differently. His once open gestures were now guarded. Especially with his phone. He'd shield it, pulling it away if she happened to glance over. For someone who had always proclaimed transparency, this new secrecy was jarring. One morning, she couldn't ignore the feeling any longer. While he slept, she quietly took his phone from the nightstand. Her hands trembled, knowing this was a breach of trust. But the gut feeling, the need to know, was overpowering. She opened his messages and there, in black and white, was the truth that shattered her world. He had been speaking with another woman, someone he had met online. Their conversations were frequent, casual at first, then more intimate. Scrolling through, she saw photos, explicit, exchanged back and forth with a level of casual familiarity that felt like a punch to her stomach. They had shared moments and words that she'd thought belonged solely to her. It was a mixture of disbelief and a nauseating realization. How long had he been leading this double life? What had she missed while she was at work? Assuming he was just home? She placed his phone back gently, her heart a heavy weight in her chest. Confrontation was the first thought that crossed her mind. She could wake him, demand an explanation, force him to answer for the betrayal. But then, a clearer voice surfaced. This wasn't something that could be explained away. The damage was done. The rest of the day unfolded like an out-of-body experience. She moved through it as if on autopilot, her mind consumed by the images and words she had read. By evening, she had made her decision. She would leave. There was no coming back from this. Leaving wasn't simple. Their lives had become intertwined over the years. They had shared expenses, possessions, a pet they had raised together. The decision about the pet, a gentle creature who had been her solace, was particularly difficult. She was the one who fed, bathed, and walked it. Her partner only played with it occasionally, enjoying the lighter side of pet ownership. She wondered if the animal would be better off with her. Yet she knew her partner cared deeply for it in his own way. Days passed as she strategized her exit. She discreetly moved her belongings, enlisting friends to help in phases. Every time she looked at him, she felt a mix of sorrow and anger, a strange realization that the person lying beside her was now a stranger. Finally, the day came. She left a note on his desk. Concise but clear. She packed her things, along with everything she had contributed to their shared life. She even took her old gaming equipment, things she had lent him out of love and trust, realizing now that these small acts of generosity had been a one-way street. The note she left was a farewell without anger. Simply a statement that she had taken her things and wouldn't be looking back. She didn't mention the affair. At this point, it was irrelevant. After she left, he attempted to reach out, calling her, messaging her. He appeared at her workplace, desperate for an explanation, for closure. Why? He asked. Couldn't we talk it through? Standing there, face to face, she realized how far she had come. There was a strength in her now that hadn't been there before. She answered his questions calmly, asserting that their relationship had run its course. His pleas grew desperate, offering gifts, even suggesting they co-parent the pet. She declined. In the weeks that followed, she learned from mutual acquaintances about his continued attempts to seek closure. His complaints, his disbelief. She felt sadness, but it was mixed with a liberating sense of relief. For the first time in years, she was free from his grasp. Over time, she found herself reconnecting with the people and passions she had once loved. She rebuilt herself, focusing on her health, rekindling friendships, rediscovering the hobbies that had faded in the shadow of her past relationship. The relationship had been a lesson, a hard, painful, but valuable one. She learned the importance of listening to her intuition, of not compromising her values, and of recognizing when a relationship crosses from protective to possessive. In the end, she was grateful for the experience, not for the pain, but for the clarity it had brought to her life. It was a chapter closed, a story told, and a future waiting to be written.